Why do we stop enjoying the things we used to? From feeling like we could do something all day, every day, to having nothing to do, or forcing ourselves to do what we used to love. From being so excited to being so burnt out and directionless and everything. Feeling nothing in victory and violently hating ourselves for defeat. It's easy to feel like everyone has something except you. Some talent, some purpose, that you could never be as great as you wanted and are slowly losing that joy you once felt. I'd felt that exact feeling slowly creeping in over the last couple years. I tried everything to fight it off to no success until I watched this film. A film which seems to cover every human experience imaginable in pursuing something. The anguish of realizing that you're not as talented as you thought. Slowly realizing that the end goal won't save you. The frustration of hitting your ceiling, and somehow it turns all of that into something beautiful. Something that makes it all enjoyable again. 100 meters opens up to our two main characters, and everyone, to at least some degree, will be able to relate to at least one of them. Togashi, the gifted wonder kid who equates his value with his results, and Komiya, the unassuming awkward outcast who hopes that one day he'll achieve enough to finally feel good. Now, Togashi wins every race with such dominance that the other kids don't even see the point in racing against him. He believes running the 100 meter faster than anyone else can solve almost anything. And it's hard to blame him for thinking that, as after all, he got a lot of benefits from this. He's super popular, he gets endless praise, he's told he'll go on to do such great things. But despite it all, he just doesn't seem that enthused by it all, does he? He doesn't even bother running on sports day because, well, what's the point? Everyone knows he'd win and she doesn't really care. It feels like it's quite externally rewarding, but doesn't do a ton internally for him. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing. I do think people overly demonize external motivation and validation at times, but there are two traps he's fallen into that would go on to crush him down the line. It's not his fault whatsoever. I've done this, and I guarantee you have as well. He's told himself that I need to achieve X, I need to reach this level, etc. Now, I already hear some of you asking, well, what's wrong with that? Isn't it good to be ambitious? Didn't you make like 10 videos on exactly that? Yes, absolutely. But when something starts to feel like an obligation instead of an opportunity, it is going to end in disaster. Because when you don't reach it, or you lose, you start to hate yourself. You beat yourself up for not doing more and being better. But when you do win, it feels like almost nothing because you just expected yourself to. You don't feel like there's anything to celebrate. I've gone through that more times than I can count, and I can guarantee you've told yourself that at least once as well. For Togashi, at this point it's become his entire identity. He's the fastest runner. But what do you think happens to someone who grew up with such sky-high expectations for themselves when they realize it might not happen? You might already know the answer, but even if we don't fall into this elite gifted kid category, you'll no doubt have felt that drive to be something great. You'll have felt your view of yourself improve or decline based on your results on something. We like to say the results aren't everything, but it is humanly very difficult to not be affected by them at all, especially when it's something we've put a lot of time or effort into. It's completely normal. It's not something to feel bad about. We likely had such grand ambitions for ourselves until the world crushed us with how difficult it really is. Hit us with the reality of how ordinary we are. And it sucks because we felt the pull towards something and didn't quite make it. Or if we didn't feel a pull to it, we might have felt a push instead, represented by our other main character who was the complete opposite, Komiya. He's a terrible runner. He's frail, he's awkward, he has no friends, nothing except running. But unlike Togashi, he doesn't get anything external from it. Komiya runs to escape from reality because something is wrong at home for him. The film is intentionally very, very vague about what, so that we as viewers can mentally replace it with whatever we've got going on ourselves. But something dark is going on at home that he has no idea how to even begin to resolve. And so, with no other option, he simply distracts himself from that feeling, as many of us do through whatever means of our own choosing, right? Because as you get older, your problems get increasingly complicated to try and solve. Sometimes they seem just completely impossible, so it's 100 times easier to just take our minds off it for a bit. Sometimes in incredibly unhealthy ways, I would say substances, etc. But honestly, I think for our generation, more common is just doom scrolling or playing a video game for 12 hours even when you stopped enjoying it after one, because it just lets you stop thinking about it for a bit. And I don't say that in a judgmental way by any means. It can be really hard, but that's a crucial point to remember for later on. Especially as what I think is becoming more common these days is eventually that person gets so fed up with their own circumstances, frustrated with themselves for wasting so much time, tired of being a loser, etc., that they finally become honest with themselves, and that begins to push them towards something. They go to the gym, they try to make money, they do something because it makes them feel better, whether through pure distraction through the act or satisfaction in winning. For Komiya, it starts off even simpler than that. He runs mindlessly without even a destination in mind, so that the world blurs. With no obvious solution to whatever's going on, this at least subdues the pain for a bit before he has to return to that darkness, until he's given a light at the end of the tunnel following a chance meeting with Togashi, where he's both in awe at his speed and captivated by his mantra, one that comes up repeatedly throughout the film. Running the 100 meters faster than anyone can solve almost any problem. Maybe you see where I'm going with this, but although well-intended from Togashi, this is the moment that Komiya fell into a trap that would make all his achievements meaningless. That if he just gets faster, everything will be okay. That's the solution to everything. And him having something resourceful to focus on and aspire to is of course a brilliant thing. And we can see how much joy his first victory brings him. After a ton of training with Togashi, he goes from the most awkward run you'd ever see to winning a gold medal on sports day. And that medal represents hope. It makes him genuinely happy, but this is where the problem starts. And again, I guarantee you've said this to yourself at some point, that once I achieve X, I'll be happy. Once Y happens, I'll feel better. Once I reach this level, then I'll be happy. In my experience, it doesn't happen. You reach it and it does almost nothing. Instead, you just think that you'll finally be happy once you reach the next level and the cycle continues. And it's tricky because that first success feels great. When I went from, borderline failing my exams to being the top of the class, when I went from feeling like I'd accomplished nothing to getting a silver play button, when I went from being the skinny kid to getting, compliments on my physique, right? Achieving things is awesome. It is. Because it's not just the external rewards, it's the internal feeling of, wow, I'm not as much of a failure as I thought, or, I can do things, I don't have to stay that way. And so naturally, you assume to get that feeling back again, you just need more success. But the victories after the first just never quite hit the same, do they? It's almost like chasing a rush, well, it made me feel better last time, so clearly I just need that again. And obviously there's going to be exceptions to this, but I generally found that the first big milestone is always the most exciting. And it's because not that much actually changes. You're still doing the same thing, just at a higher level. If Togashi wins and goes through, he's still going to be running 100 meters, right? The first milestone is proof that you can do something that you thought you couldn't, which feels awesome. But beyond that, it's very easy to overestimate how much it'll do for you. So what do? Well, it's partly learning to celebrate and be pleased with how well you've done, even if there are people out there better than you, accepting that you haven't got to be the best in the world to be happy, and it's partly something else that I'll come to later. But for now, of course, the problem isn't that he's striving to become a better runner. The problem is that he expects it to solve all his other problems. Well, he hopes so at least, because he doesn't know what else there is. And I think this is exactly where we struggle. We know that it doesn't make sense to be so dependent on external validation and so obsessed over a single result. Like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but what else is there? How do we find the other things to support that? Well, following this, Komiya moves school, presumably linked to whatever is happening at home, and he wouldn't see Togashi again for many years to come. And Togashi, now in his later teens, is everything he was told he'd become. He's winning every race. He's being held as the next national champion by the experts. But in an instant, it all finally falls apart in his last year of high school. In his final race, he hears a new, terrifying sound. Footsteps catching up to him. Out of nowhere, he loses for the first time in his life. It's a moment that changes everything. He has a complete breakdown. He's terrified to even run again. And it's here that a major question is raised. Where's the balance here? Because we've seen the dangers of caring too much with Togashi, yet the undeniable results it brought. We've seen the costs of making something your entire identity, but also how that same intensity can be the thing that drags you up from the bottom to somewhere you never thought you'd reach. So, how do you balance all of that? That question has been in my mind for years, and I feel like it's kind of been the elephant in the room in a lot of my videos. But I've never really given an answer for it because I didn't really know myself, let alone trying to talk about it to you on here. The closest I really had was, well, it's going to be different for everyone. Whilst not wrong, this film gave me a better answer than I could have ever come up with myself. It's here that we find out why Komiya chose this school specifically. Japan's national 100-meter champion, Zaitsu, used to go here. The undisputed king of the 100 meters for 15 years, and yet much like Komiya and young Togashi, not even a flicker of passion shows in his eyes as he steps up to the podium. In this psychological ecosystem where the athlete's speed has such a deep impact on their self-worth, Zaitsu is something beyond that. He's won it all. He's obtained glory beyond what you, me, 99.99999% of humanity would ever reach, and yet nothing. In fact, it's the opposite. He's almost jealous of the challenges in a way. He starts his speech off by saying, "Society is a joke. Don't think too seriously. I'm a living thing. I will die, never to be born again. That's all the reason I need." Which, nothing too revolutionary so far, right? The idea that nothing matters and therefore you can do whatever you want without too much fear isn't anything new, as a kind of positive nihilism, I suppose. But how does someone who thinks nothing matters end up pushing themselves hard enough to become national champion? He claims, "Whenever I'm competing, I can focus, since I'm not afraid of losing, my mind is clear. But I also fear defeat, since I desire results." Understandably, he's asked by one of the students how the hell that works. Whether he gets mood swings from these contrasting ideas. Zaitsu responds that he doesn't. He benefits 100% from both, and that he does so that he can enjoy feeling nervous. It never even occurred to me in all the time I'd been pondering this that you don't need to balance the two ideas. You can feel fine with losing, for after all, you're just a clump of cells, just a human, and yet feel so excited by the idea of victory at the same time, because, well, why wouldn't you? In your one life, there's no reason not to just go after whatever it is you want. There's nothing you need. Life just simply isn't that serious. You should only pursue what you genuinely want. Even if it's as absurd as trying to run past a bit of paint 0.01 seconds faster than someone else. To choose something so absurd to dedicate yourself to gives meaning to an otherwise arguably meaningless life. It is the absolute purest form of freedom, and yet he goes a step further than that. Because of course, being cells, being humans naturally, we will get a bit nervous about losing, right? You're not going to get that out of you. We'll get anxious about not getting the things we want, etc. And so Komiya asks him how he handles his nerves, opening up about his own fears of injury. But Zaitsu thinks this way to enjoy being nervous. He doesn't run for glory or for a title. He doesn't run to avoid any negative feelings that come with it. He doesn't try to make it something it isn't. He just enjoys the experience of running. Because the anxiety and fear of a challenge, the ups and downs of victories and losses, should really be seen as a kind of beautiful blessing. Not only do nerves likely mean that you're challenging yourself, which will probably lead to something awesome, but because the alternative is nothing. Safety isn't always pleasant. Fear isn't always unpleasant. Often too much comfort just leads to boredom. Our brains are just naturally wired to constantly look for threats, for problems. And so if you don't really have any, your brain will start to create some. And so you need to choose them instead. A big competition, a risk, something to be earned or lost. Some of the best moments people describe in their lives are ones that were objectively stressful, and yet simultaneously you can understand that you'll be fine no matter what. Zaitsu is not some enlightened monk who feels nothing. He feels all of it. He just stopped seeing the uncomfortable parts as problems to be solved and started treating them as part of the experience he signed up for. I'm obviously not saying that all problems are something to be grateful for. Obviously there's exceptions, right? But as Zaitsu says, the view from first is really the same as the view from last. You're still running the same race. And that's something that I think is super important for a lot of people to understand. The level you do something at probably won't change if you enjoy it or not. You might get more external rewards, sure, but if you don't enjoy it at the level you're at, you won't suddenly enjoy it when you become champion. And I think this is what stops a lot of people from starting something they want to as well. They think they're too old, too short, too slow, too whatever it may be. And they think that, well, everyone's been doing it for so long already, it's too late for me to start at my age. But nothing drastically changes, even if that is the case. I was worried about this when I first started getting into volleyball, but don't let the thought of, oh, I wish I was better, get in the way of enjoying it, because it doesn't make as much difference as you'd expect. If you don't enjoy it now, you're not going to enjoy it 5 years from now once you get better. Maybe it's just not for you. But if it is, don't delay enjoying it. And this is a much longer discussion, but for Komiya, as we mentioned earlier, there will never be this moment where he's climbed high enough that solves everything. But he's not got any other options right now. And so unlike Togashi, who, out of shame from his defeat, went out of his way to avoid running, ignoring all offers from elite school just to hide away in a local one, Komiya instead sought out the absolute best he could. Even if it meant a 2-hour cycle each way, he similarly caught a bit of that consuming ambition that sometimes hits us, where we'd do literally anything if it meant being able to do what we enjoy the most. But what's particularly interesting about it all is despite that dedication, he still doesn't seem to care much. In his training, he's very mechanical. He's just going through the motions, even when he explodes into a sprint. And he's still putting in a lot of effort, of course, but this isn't the fire of someone excited for something. It's more of just a doing it just because, right? And that's pretty normal, really. This is a little bit of a side rant, but it is perfectly 100% normal not to be fired up all the time. Chances are, if you're into videos like this, you're quite self-aware of how motivated you are at any given moment. And it's very easy to spiral and think something is wrong with you when it's not super high for a while, but it just happens. And I think this is more important than ever when more and more people are looking to get into this idea of making their full-time jobs to be following their passions, right? They've got something they love outside of their job and they want to do that full-time instead. I've spoken about this in one of my other videos, but YouTube is not my full-time job. I still work full-time alongside this. But I have, of course, spoken to plenty of people who are doing it full-time. They all say the same thing, Eventually that thing you were so obsessed and excited by just kind of becomes the norm. You don't have that fire all the time. Sometimes you enjoy it more, sometimes less, but the expectation that you'll find something you enjoy 100% of the time is a dangerous one in my eyes, because it just doesn't really happen. Of course, there are ways to positively influence that, and we'll talk more about that when we get to Togashi's career later on. But I've always found it interesting that professional athletes and massive YouTubers end up retiring so early on when they're doing something that clearly they used to have such immense passion for, and it still brings in so much money for them. Obviously, it's not that simple. There's lots of other factors at play here that I don't have time to discuss, but it's interesting how even all that isn't enough to keep someone super excited forever. So expecting that is only going to frustrate you. And equally, or perhaps even more frustrating, is the realization that maybe you're not as great as you hoped you were. And this is where we cut back to Togashi following his first defeat. Now, by simple definition, unfortunately that's most of us, right? That's definitely me. 99.99% of us are just not going to go professional at the thing we love. It is what it is, it's something to come to terms with, although I don't think it's something to be down about, whatsoever. And if you are, by the end of this video, you won't be. But rationally, one loss should not be the end of the world for Togashi. There's no reason why he can't just run again, continue training, but he'd never learned how to handle or respond to defeat. And going back to the start, when the victories do so little for you, but defeat is a reason to hate yourself, what have you actually got to gain at that point? What is the point in running that race? It's no wonder he doesn't want to keep doing it. And side note, this is what I've kind of noticed over the years, that the people who are actually slightly less obsessed with something tend to actually do extremely well in the long run. The people who are more like 70, 80% all in rather than 100, they quite often end up going further because they don't get these crazy negative spirals. They don't obsess over optimizing every tiny detail to the point where they start to major in the minors and burn out. They don't see defeat in a way that causes them to hate themselves when it happens. They might feel frustrated, but they won't go off the deep end. And there's honestly real value in not feeling like defeat is the end of the world, especially as it's kind of inevitable, right? But it's not easy for Togashi because it's all he's ever been valued for. He goes as far as to come up with a whole cover story about an injury to excuse why he lost, because running is all he is. If he lost without a valid reason, it'd be beyond shameful. And yet he doesn't really have any other route. Even at his new school, he's immediately recognized as that fast runner. They repeatedly ask him to join the track club, and despite initially refusing, eventually he agrees to do a single run in exchange for being left alone. Not a race, just a run. No crowds, no opponents, not even a timer. Just 100 meters in front of him, his footsteps hitting the ground, and the wind against his face. And something just clicks. Although he's obviously still quick, with no one timing him, in that moment he wasn't fast, he's just running. It's beautiful. It reminds him how much he used to just love running before the pressure to maintain a reputation or always win got to him. When was the last time you let yourself do that? To just do something you love without worrying about what it will bring for you or how good you are at it. Nowadays, it seems like every hobby has to become a side hustle. It has to be optimized and monetized. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But it can feel almost weird to let yourself do something that won't, quote, get you something that isn't productive. Not necessarily our fault when, economic struggles kind of force us to have some sort of side income to be able to survive, but just doing something because you genuinely love it is such a beautiful feeling that is so easily lost, as we see throughout the film. To fully dedicate yourself to something is of course an equally beautiful thing. And whilst the film doesn't shy away from the potential physical and mental dangers of becoming too tunnel-visioned on a single pursuit, I think I've kind of covered the mental side already. And of course, the physical is obvious, right? If you try to push through when your body is telling you to stop, it's going to come back to bite you eventually. And this leads us all to the scene that really put this film on the map. Perhaps the coolest looking shot of all time, the rain scene. There's not much you can do to make a sprint interesting to watch. They just kind of run in a short, straight line. And yet it tells the entire story of Komiya and Togashi's lives. Togashi starts off impossibly far ahead of everyone, yet out of nowhere, Komiya overtakes him, and still doesn't show an ounce of excitement at defeating someone he once looked at with such pure awe. He's not even out of breath, he's almost more machine than human. If you told him at the start of the film that he would beat Togashi one day, he'd either not believe you or be absolutely ecstatic about it. But it does nothing for him. And likewise, the message this race sends to Togashi is very clear. You're just not good enough anymore. Give up running. And so the question remains, when neither of them are seemingly getting anything out of this, when did they stop enjoying it all? And above all, why continue to run? 10 years pass by. Togashi is now barely getting by as a professional athlete, one season away from losing his contract and having to watch Komiya race at the very, very top. The position he grew up thinking he would be in one day, yet now has to stomach the idea that he may simply never be as great as he hoped. And this is where we meet someone who in his mere 10 minutes of screen time became one of my favorite characters ever, the forever second Kaido. And I love this archetype of the constant runner-up. You know, Vegeta, Seto Kaiba, those kind of characters, because it's so raw and real. To feel like you're hitting some kind of constant invisible wall, as though you just weren't born to succeed at this. As though something is almost blocking you from it. 15 years of second places, of living in his rival's shadow, of watching himself slowly decline through age. It'd be enough to drive anyone at least slightly mad, right? To make them justify it in their head somehow. Oh, he's only winning because he's younger. Or at least resign themselves to their fate of being number two, accepting that that's all they'll ever be. And yet, in a cast of characters who assign so much value to their results, Kaido refuses to be defined by that. He's a very clear parallel to Togashi in terms of the super gifted kid hitting a wall. But unlike Togashi, he doesn't let his whole identity anchor on those results alone. And yet, he's utterly committed to giving everything towards winning the next one. He still believes it's possible. Provided he's willing to look reality dead in the eye, he believes he can escape it. And this is many people's favorite quote from the movie. It's one of my favorites in anything. Looking straight into reality can be extremely terrifying. You have to accept things you don't want to accept. But to truly reject reality, you have to face it head on with your eyes wide open. Sounds simple, but when he said this, I realized that I don't think I've ever truly 100% done this in my life. To be fully, brutally honest with yourself about everything. Maybe you waste a lot of time but don't acknowledge it. Maybe there's things you're just not willing to do for whatever reason. Maybe you're not being consistent. Maybe there's things other people are doing that you're not. But every time you look at them, rather than figuring out why they're ahead, instead you come up with some justification to downplay it. I just made a whole video on this. If you open up the comment section on any post of someone saying they're doing well, there will be multiple comments trying to downplay it or dismiss their success, right? Maybe that's even your first reaction when you see that. It was certainly mine, but Kaido believes in the complete opposite. Not to resolve your problems with, yeah, but, or I'll show them, or one day I will, or any number of things, but instead to simply look at what you're not doing and accept that you don't already know or do everything you could. And it's horribly uncomfortable, right? It's so much easier to think to ourselves that, oh, they're just doing better because they're lucky. They're just this, they're just that. To embrace reality is the only way to truly escape it. And it becomes a lot easier to do when you take a page out of Zaitsu's book and just take it a little less seriously. There's no reason to be afraid of admitting all of those shortcomings because it's just not that serious. Much like Zaitsu, rather than trying to balance two contradicting ideas, he uses both of them. He's fully, completely realistic about where he is, yet is utterly optimistic, arguably even delusional about where he can go. He uses escapism only for motivation, rather than hiding from his current situation. And this is exactly what Togashi needed to hear. We get a little montage of him going around, winning races, eating, stretching, doing everything he needs to, and he looks happier than he's ever been. Until fate strikes again. He hits that invisible wall that just refuses to let him have what he wants. He gets injured a week before his final race to save his career. If he doesn't participate, his future as a runner is over. If he does, which he can still do, but he runs the risk of ruining his leg forever. Now, you've probably seen that one gif of him crying on his knees. Shortly after he received his diagnosis, he runs into a group of kids who are coincidentally practicing for their own race. They've got this very pure, childlike joy for the sport, and Togashi gets up to give them some advice and tell them that there's no need to sacrifice everything for it, as it's not like their whole life depends on it. The irony isn't lost on him, and he can't even get the words out without breaking down because he knows the same applies to him. He knows he can still have a stable career as a coach that was just offered to him. You know, it is not the end of his life, yet only now, when it's finally about to be taken away from him for good, does he realize how much he just wants to run, to compete in this race against Komiya. That he'd been getting caught up on all the wrong things this whole time, when just being able to do the thing you enjoy, is the most important part. And it's really interesting that Togashi still chooses to run despite the risks, right? Because earlier on, I didn't dwell on this, but we spent a whole mini arc with someone that Togashi wants to look up to. They let the pressure get to them. They pushed themselves when they shouldn't have, and the injury they got derailed their entire career as a result. And so the series could have just as easily gone down the route of him accepting his life without running. You know, he becomes a coach. We've seen that he quite enjoys that, so it would have been a very reasonable route for him. For Togashi to take that same risk, obviously, yeah, it is kind of reckless, but it represents him doing whatever he can to experience the thrill of competition instead of just accepting a safe career that others attempt to push on him. For him to lose that excitement, that chance to run alongside his old friend one last time, is just not an option. It's something almost essential for living, something that we should never give up on for as long as we can prevent it. And so, this leads us into the penultimate race, a semi-final heat containing Zaitsu, Komiya, and Kaido, the latter of which knows that not one person out there expects him to win. Zaitsu or Komiya, Zaitsu or Komiya, Zaitsu or Komiya. It's all he hears leading up to the race, and after 15 years of losses, who could blame them? Unsurprisingly, as the race starts, his old legs start to fall behind. This is his reality. He's just slower. He doesn't flinch from it. He doesn't despair or become filled with frustration. He just resolves to escape from it, to change the fact rather than comfort himself on them. And after 15 long years of banging on that door, it finally breaks open. Kaido wins. Zaitsu is eliminated. Ironically, as though the universe wanted to get in the joke one last time, Kaido gets the second fastest time in Japan's history, but who cares? He's done it. Zaitsu retires following this, and this isn't him being a sore loser. It's not a cowardly retreat or a tragic downfall. He just finally enjoyed a genuine rivalry. The feeling of having to truly push himself and still lose. To continue to run to simply try to cling to his past glory is a waste of his life. When we're all cells, we're all biological matter with limited lifespan, it's absurd to waste time on something like that instead of something you genuinely desire. Of course, not everyone is going to understand that. To many people, I'm sure, Zaitsu's retirement just looked like a retreat to avoid losing more in future. But again, why let something like the thoughts in other people's heads get in the way of anything? And that leads us to the final race of the series, the last discussion between Komiya and Togashi before they finally get a rematch after a whole decade. And it's the culmination of everything we've spoken about so far. Komiya, now having an existential crisis, doesn't know why he came so far. He thinks the emptiness he feels has no solution, that he's never experienced the joy of going all out, and he doesn't know what the point of any of it is. He gets faster, races again, gets faster, races again. What is there for him at the end of it all? Is it all for nothing? To which Togashi responds, to give it our all. After all, running the 100-meter dash faster than anyone else can solve almost anything. Which is initially kind of weird, right? He knows by now that that's not the case, or at least not in the way he said it as a kid. Back then, he thought the result of winning the 100 meters solved all his problems. Now it's the pursuit of running the 100 meters, not I will run or I have ran, but I'm actively pursuing it, grounded in reality, as Kaido says. And Komiya understands that difference because he spent his whole life using running as a vehicle for something else. First to blur the world, then to climb out of it, and then to prove something to himself. He's been trying to use it as a tool when it's just not. It's not the answer to anything anymore. It's just a 100-meter dash. It's the same place Togashi arrived in that run with no crowd, no time and no opponent. It's the same place Zaitsu lived in for years without ever quite being able to explain it. The same place Kaido found when he stopped flinching from his reality and ran through it anyway. They all got there differently, but they all got here in this final race. And going into this, I had no idea who was going to win. Leaving it, of course, I still have no idea who won because the film infamously leaves it completely hidden, cutting to black before we can see. I don't think I've ever seen a sports anime end this way. Normally it's the big celebration after so many chapters of build-up, the roaring of a crowd, the champion getting what they worked so hard for, and of course my first initial reaction was, wait, but who won? But although controversial, to me this shot of them grinning as they crossed the line is the absolute best way this film could have ended. Neither of them care who won. Togashi is no longer running to protect a reputation or feeling like a loss is the end of him. Komiya no longer running to try and save himself or feeling like winning is the only solution. They're both just ecstatic. They gave that final race everything they possibly could. And it sounds incredibly basic to just say, well, they learned to love the process more than the results. But it's not something that just happens. You can't just think to yourself that you'll start to do that and suddenly start to enjoy it more, right? You kind of can, but not completely. There's no technique, no sudden mindset shift, no video that you watch that suddenly makes the joy coming back, right? Not even this one. That question I opened with, why do we stop enjoying the things we used to? I don't think it's because anything has changed. I think it's because somewhere along the way, we started asking it to be something that it was never going to be. We made it carry our self-worth or be our escape or our proof that we're not ordinary. But it can't. It's just an activity, a pursuit. It can't do anything like that. I suppose you could say that it's less about finding the right reason and more about letting go of the wrong ones, of accepting that it's just a 100-meter run and nothing more. The film doesn't tell you to care less, and neither am I, obviously. Zaitsu still feels nerves. Kaido still wants to win after 15 years. Togashi still breaks down at the thought of never racing again. The pursuit is a beautiful thing, and caring about it is not the problem. It's what you've attached to it. So if you're watching this and that feeling I described at the start sounds familiar, I'm not going to tell you that it goes away, or that one day you'll find your thing and it'll all click. What I am saying is that the version of you that loved it all before the pressure got to it isn't gone. It's just been waiting for you to stop needing it to be more than it actually is. Go run your 100 meters.